A few years ago, TV commercials had great fun supposing that cavemen live among us. Actually, we are all cavemen. 99.9% of our DNA is exactly the same as Stone Age humans. We are essentially clones of those ancient beings. The genetic programming that ensured their survival as family-centered bands of nomadic hunter-gatherers lives on in each of us today, dominating our emotions, sometimes to our benefit, but often not, simply because those ancient people were programmed to live vastly different lives. You've heard that childhood experiences play a major role in determining how you think, feel, and act as an adult, but they are only part of the story. Ancient genetic programming is the reason childhood training continues to haunt our adult lives the way it does. Emotional intelligence is the skill of accounting for these two major influences. In a previous video, I outlined a simplified model of the human brain consisting of two brains, a left brain and a right brain that often don't see eye to eye because they process information differently. A rational left brain is detail-oriented and greatly influenced by learned rules, especially the social rules that underpin present-day modern life. The unconscious right brain, by contrast, operates holistically on the basis of inborn Stone Age biases that served ancient people well but often fail to support our pursuit of the aspirations we hold dear. Because the right brain communicates its priorities emotionally, people see themselves as being torn between their conscious, rational selves and their emotions, which has led many people to try to get on with their lives by manipulating their emotions with drugs. This series of videos aims to show that emotional intelligence is a much better approach to dealing with these intrusions of Stone Age emotions in our modern lives. This particular video will introduce you to a few examples of how your inner emotional caveman shapes your life in ways you take for granted. For example, to maximize their chance of surviving, our ancient ancestors needed to be highly motivated each day to meet the many challenges of living in the wild. They had to be designed to find living in nature inspiring and energizing in itself. Since we are essentially the same as those ancient beings, that primordial programming must be in us too, and it is. As beings meant to thrive while roaming ancient savannas and shorelines, we too are inspired and renewed when we return to natural surroundings during vacations and visits to parks and golf courses that mimic our ancient stopping grounds. Our need for continuing contact with nature can also be seen in the comfort we derive from the plants we care for in our offices and the greenery that decorates public office spaces. It is also evident in the contentment that comes from surrounding our homes with natural landscapes, homes whose interiors we often also adorn with plants as well. So tangible are the positive benefits of living among natural things that we immediately think to send plants and flowers to those who are hospitalized, in the expectation that they will aid in the healing process. Not only do we embed our homes in greenery, many of us also have animals of various types living with us too. We are the only beings on Earth who keep pets inside our habitats, and we do so because it gives us pleasure to be among them in the manner of our ancient ancestors. Another area where our ancient roots reveal themselves concerns the foods we crave, which are the same foods early cavemen also unthinkingly craved. Our big caveman brains consume a lot of energy which must come from the food we eat. Yet high-calorie foods were scarce in early times. Nature's solution was to implant a constant craving for such foods in Stone Age people so that they would be unlikely to miss an opportunity to harvest them when they became available. Complex sugars from fruits were a high priority, but were a poor second to something even more desirable. If you guessed meat, you just missed the mark.
And what I want to do is kind of theoretically tackle this problem of meat. And what I think is problematic about it is that lean meat is actually not that calorie rich. Or if it is calorie rich, it is also metabolically difficult to process, so it's expensive as well, which is what the Atkins diet is about. That's why it works. Because when you eat too much lean meat and you don't have a lot of other calories coming in from sugars or from fats, you lose weight. And obviously losing weight is a really bad idea if you're an early creature trying to forage for a subsistence. So you want to avoid losing weight. You probably would want to avoid eating too much lean meat. And we have evidence of this from these kind of early explorers who would go out and they would get themselves stuck somewhere in the winter, and they'd be eating rabbits all winter long. But as the winter wears on, the rabbits are getting leaner and leaner and leaner. And eventually, these early explorers are eating meat every single day and still starving to death. And that's because lean meat is not actually that metabolically, it's a metabolically expensive thing to consume. So I think what we got to do is we got to think about fat as something that is really the focus, not meat. We know that all hunter-gatherers, when they find a dead animal or when they hunt an animal, they eat the marrow out of the bones because marrow is essentially a big fatty substance, especially in those big bones. So what I'm trying to do is interrogate that problem of meat eating and say, I think actually the big brain probably couldn't have come about because of meat eating, because that doesn't make caloric sense. Instead, I think it's probably an emphasis on fat. And of course, we in this room, going back to the bacon, we like fat. We recognize that this is a valuable thing. This is why people like Wagyu, right? I mean, everything that's fattier tastes a little bit better. We know that, regardless of the source. So, right? What do these things have in common? They're delicious and high in fat. So we inherently crave fat, and there's a reason we inherently crave fat. Because in the past, it was actually pretty good for us to get fat. Fat was not something that was widely available on these kinds of landscapes. And if you think about it, if you're an Australopith and you're trying to imagine what you'd like to have for dinner, it's going to be the fattier the better.
So humans have always craved fat, in addition to high-calorie sugars and carbohydrates. What has changed over the years is that the sugars, carbohydrates, and fats that were very scarce and often dangerous to acquire have become available everywhere as cheaply abundant processed food. No matter what fast food restaurants claim they are providing, they are dedicated to selling sugar and fat. Supermarkets are too. Many supermarket aisles are packed with foods containing added sugars, high-calorie carbohydrates, and fat. Much of the food industry is geared toward pandering to our ancient programming. Its business models are based on the bet that few of us will persist in wresting control over our lives from our caveman cravings long enough to affect their bottom lines. The current obesity epidemic provides ample evidence that they are correct. We are diseased fatties, while early cavemen remained healthy and lean because we blindly follow our outdated right brain emotions, even when doing so makes no rational sense. We like to think of ourselves as guiding our lives by rational left brain choices, but our wimpy left brains knuckle under to primordial right brain emotions time and again. Wresting control over our diets means training our right brains to accept reasonable limits on their Stone Age cravings. Ideally, that training should begin in childhood. But if your childhood was anything like mine, it was centered on a continuing supply of fat-laden, sugary snacks, treats, bribes, and desserts. Having grown up on the south side of Chicago, my kid fantasies centered on an ice cream shop where everything that was bad for me was piled mountain high in one place, atop scrumptious rainbow ice cream cones. So for most of us, training our right brains means dieting as adults, the nuts and bolts of which consist of our left brains controlling our eating habits so they adhere to modern rules of healthy consumption, despite right brain emotional temptations and complaints. Ancient right brain programming resists our efforts by creating unpleasant emotions and feelings in defense of every fat cell that would bite the dust if dieting were successful. Each fat cell is defended as a precious commodity because in ancient times it was, as a hedge against starvation.
Just listen to this stomach of mine. The way it sounds, you'd think I had a hyena inside me.
Do have some more bread and butter, Mr. Allnut.
Well, thanks, Miss. I don't mind if I do.
A growling stomach is annoying and can be embarrassing, but if that were all that our left brains had to contend with, most of us would stick to our diets long enough for our right brains to experience the health and other benefits of a svelte physique, and thus begin generating supportive emotions. What people often don't realize is that behind all the grumbling is an intelligent brain, one that is just as smart as the left brain and doubly more devious in getting its way. The activities of the left brain are associated with your conscious self, with conscious acts of will. When dieting, your left brain must force itself to maintain its focus and resolve, and this takes effort that causes the left brain to become weary over time. Constant emotional badgering by the right brain wears the left brain down until the sight of a burger on TV glistening with fat and oozing with sugary, sweet secret sauce becomes impossible to resist. Never let your left brain underestimate its adversary, because your right brain will run rings around it if you do. Every embarrassing growl your stomach makes, every bout of seeming weakness or incapacity brought about by an empty stomach, every shout by your inner voice for exceptions to the dieting rules because of extraordinary circumstances. All of that and more are the work of your wily right brain, as is the strategy of waiting until you're weakest to tempt you most ferociously. Your right brain might even resort to supporting your left brain in puffing with pride at its ability to stick to your diet for so long, because at some point that will provide a rationale for thinking that a little fat-laden sugary treat can't possibly do any harm. One harmless snack will lead to another, and before you know it, you are on the sugar slippery slope to ending your diet once again. The most dramatic example of our ancient programming is our approach to family life, which remains our greatest source of fulfillment now as it did in the beginning. The bonds that held families together in ancient times operate just as forcefully today. In ancient times, multi-generational family units lived together their whole lives. The opening scenes of the movie My Big Fat Wedding 2, showing various generations of the Portocalos family living next door to one another, illustrates the fact that a majority of people today cluster similarly even in urban settings, in effect perpetuating the ancient practice of huddling together as family-centered bands. Because of family bands, it is not at all unusual for parents to sacrifice greatly to help children in need, even when they are grown, and for children to go to extraordinary lengths to aid parents who have become indigent or infirmed. There is something emotionally compelling that kicks in when the person in trouble is family. Companies routinely co-opt this programming by selling their employees on the idea that they are valued members of one big happy family, to motivate them to greater engagement and sacrifice, until they are unceremoniously dismissed to free up money for CEO bonuses. Ancient family survival depended on children following in their parents' footsteps. So parents were programmed to feel entitled to demand that their children did so, and children were programmed to acquiesce. That sense of parental entitlement persists today and comes into play particularly when parents operate businesses or farms or are committed to maintaining family professional traditions. This intrusion of Stone Age emotionalism causes no problem when offspring joyfully comply, but often leads to hard feelings on both sides when they don't. In such situations, parents need to recognize that their children have the same right to choose the life they wish to lead as they did, and that their children live in a world of wider opportunity than existed when Stone Age parental entitlement programming came into being. For their part, children who break with family traditions need to realize that the guilt they feel is part of the same Stone Age programming complex that motivates their parents to demand they knuckle under. What they feel is separation guilt, which creates the feeling they have done something wrong even though they haven't. This is a Stone Age bonding mechanism that arose when it was essential to family survival that all family members remain committed to the same goal their whole lives. Separation guilt takes on the appearance of survival guilt when a person separates from family members in the sense of becoming better off than them in some important way. This again supported family survival in ancient times by ensuring that individuals shared the benefits of good fortune. Like separation guilt, survival guilt can manifest itself emotionally as something other than guilt. For example, a company executive I heard about sought therapy because of his irrational attraction to a young woman, a secretary who worked for the same company. The man couldn't stop himself from pursuing her romantically, even though company policy forbade such liaisons. If he were to continue, it would be only a matter of time before they both lost their jobs. His therapist remained baffled by this behavior until she looked into his past, which revealed that his present behavior was part of a pattern. Years earlier, he had built a successful business and was quite well off until he lost all of his money through a series of bad investments. Afterwards, he rose to a high position in a large corporation, but then developed a gambling addiction, which cost him his job and his savings. Now he was risking his financial future for a love affair that he pursued without passion. The therapist suspected that survival guilt was responsible for all the self-destructive behavior. It turned out that the man's father had incompetently pursued business ventures throughout his life and seemed to become increasingly despondent whenever his son's financial fortunes rose. The patient unconsciously saw his business successes as harming his father. Survival guilt led him to sabotage his successes, thereby returning him to his father's level. Survival guilt can influence a person's ability to diet too. If you find yourself successfully losing weight only to revert to your starting weight time and again, you should consider the possibility that survival guilt is at work. Are your important friends and family members overweight? Have they tried and failed to lose weight in the past? If so, survival guilt could be why you continue to sabotage your own efforts. As with the businessman I spoke about, survival guilt need not manifest itself as guilt per se. In his case, survival guilt surfaced as reckless financial decision-making, an addiction to gambling, and an inappropriate feelings of love. Once you are fairly sure that survival guilt is in play, you need to be on your guard for any emotion, feeling, or compulsion that threatens to keep you from achieving your goal. Nor should you be dissuaded by hurt feelings on the part of your relatives and friends because of your success. They could choose to become inspired by you and follow your example. It is not your fault if they lack the courage to do so. As these few examples show, our ancient genetic heritage tugs at us in various ways, some of which can prevent us from achieving our goals when we don't understand how we are being impacted. Perhaps the most important way our ancient heritage leads us astray is by causing us to value safety over everything else. Our ancient ancestors faced life-ending hazards at every turn. Their genetic programming helped out by leading them to prefer safe choices to even better choices when better alternatives came with risk. So we evolved to make safe compromises 1,000 times to avoid making possibly life-ending risky choices even once. The next time you hear yourself saying, "better safe than sorry," realize that your ancient ancestors probably coined that phrase. Realize also that being safe and being sorry are not the only alternatives. Lifelong regret can result when we let overly protective concerns for safety inhibit us from risking to reach for once-in-a-lifetime opportunities. Our ancient programming was designed to ensure that our decisions favored species survival. Although life and death are rarely at issue in the decisions we make today, the emotional fervor supporting safe choices has not diminished one bit, challenging us to find the courage to defy this programming, to give ourselves the freedom to live as we want.